You ever get that feeling? The one that creeps up your spine, whispering that you shouldn't be here? That was me, standing at the entrance of the Noland Creek Trail, staring at the thick wall of trees, swallowing the path ahead. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of pine and something else, something old. Vanessa had been going on about this trail for weeks. People see weird things out here, she'd said, grinning like a kid about to tell a ghost story. Strange lights, shadows moving where they shouldn't, figures with huge pale eyes. Mike and I laughed it off, but now that we were here, with the last bits of sunlight fading behind the mountains, I wasn't so sure anymore. About a mile in, we spotted a rusted-out trailer just off the trail. Smoke curled lazily from a chimney pipe, and an old man sat on a makeshift porch, watching us like he'd been expecting company. "Shouldn't be out here after dark," he said, voice raspy like someone who'd been smoking longer than I'd been alive. "They don't like visitors." Vanessa, of course, wanted to know more. Who doesn't? The old man, Hank, leaned forward, eyes shadowed beneath the brim of his hat. "The pale-eyed folk. They come when the moon's high, whispering things you don't want to hear." Mike snorted. "Sounds like you just want to keep people off your lawn." Hank didn't laugh, didn't even blink, just looked at us, then at the sky. "You'll see." We left him there, his words lingering in the cooling air like the smell of rain before a storm. The deeper we hiked, the quieter it got. No birds, no insects, just the crunch of our boots on the trail and the distant sound of running water. Then the fog rolled in. Fast, unnatural. "This wasn't in the forecast," Vanessa muttered, her voice lower now. I glanced around. The path behind us was gone, swallowed by thick, white mist. "We should turn back," I said. "Relax," Mike said, but he didn't sound so sure. And that's when we saw them. Not at first, just glimpses. Movement in the trees, small figures darting between the trunks, too fast, too quiet. My pulse kicked up. Then the whispers started. Soft at first, like the wind shifting through leaves. But it wasn't the wind. "Do you hear that?" Vanessa's voice was barely above a breath. Mike turned in a slow circle, his flashlight scanning the trees. "Where's the trail?" The mist thickened, closing in, and the whispers grew louder, words in a language I didn't understand. A shiver ran through me as I realized the voices weren't coming from one place. They were all around us. Then, from the fog, something stepped forward. Small, pale, eyes too large for its face, reflecting the moonlight like an animal caught in the dark. It didn't move. It just stared. And then it whispered my name. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. It had whispered my name. My name. Mike took a step back. "Did you hear that?" His voice was shaking now, the confidence draining from it. Vanessa gripped my arm so tight it hurt. "We need to go, now." But the pale-eyed thing didn't move. It just stood there, half hidden in the swirling mist, watching us. The reflection in its eyes was unnatural, too bright, too focused. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. One moment it was there, the next only empty space remained. The whispers surged around us, now closer, circling. I spun in place, my flashlight darting over the trees. Shadows, movement, more of them. "Run!" We took off, crashing through the underbrush, lungs burning. The fog twisted around us, warping the trail, making every turn look the same. I heard Mike cursing, Vanessa gasping for breath, the forest closing in tighter. And then, Mike screamed, not a yell, not a shout, a real, guttural, bone-deep scream. I turned, saw him on the ground, thrashing like something was under his skin. His eyes were wide, mouth opening and closing, but no words came out, only a horrible, choking sound. I reached for him, but Vanessa yanked me back. "We have to go." Mike's body arched, his fingers clawing into the dirt. His skin, it was moving, pulsing, like something was crawling underneath it. And then, just like that, he stopped. His head turned toward us, too smoothly, too inhuman. And his eyes, they were pale. I grabbed Vanessa's hand and we ran. Mike wasn't Mike anymore. We sprinted through the trees, branches whipping our faces, our lungs burning. The whispers chased us, rising to an unbearable pitch, like a chorus of voices speaking in a language that didn't belong to this world. Then, out of nowhere, the ground vanished beneath me. I fell hard, tumbling down into a pit. No, a tunnel. The air here was colder, stale, thick with the scent of earth and decay. Vanessa landed beside me, coughing, hands scraping against the rough stone walls. We weren't in the forest anymore. We were underground. A faint glow flickered from deeper within. I swallowed hard, my hands shaking as I raised my flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing carvings on the walls. Not Cherokee, not anything I'd ever seen before. Jagged symbols, spirals, eyes. Vanessa touched my arm. Look. At the far end of the tunnel stood a stone doorway, half buried in the dirt. Beyond it, a chamber filled with skulls, human skulls, hundreds of them. And at the center of the room, resting on an ancient, crumbling altar, a skull with eyes that still gleamed in the dark. I took a step back. My stomach turned. Behind us, from the tunnel, the whispers started again. Vanessa gripped my wrist, voice barely a breath. They're coming. The whispers grew louder, closer. I turned, my flashlight flickering against the tunnel walls. Shadows moved, small figures hunched, crawling, their pale eyes gleaming like mirrors in the dark. They weren't running. They didn't need to. They knew we had nowhere to go. Vanessa pulled at my arm. The doorway! Block it! We stumbled toward the stone chamber, the air growing colder with each step. I grabbed a fallen rock, pushing it against the entrance, but the tunnel opening was too wide, too open. Then I saw it. The skull on the altar. Its eyes weren't just reflecting the light. They were glowing, watching. A thought crashed into me like a wave. This wasn't just a burial site. It was a warning. Vanessa grabbed my arm. What do we do? And then, the whispers stopped. The silence was worse, because that's when I saw him. Mike, standing just beyond the rock we had tried to move. His skin was deathly pale, his eyes huge, empty, glowing like the others. He smiled, not like Mike, like something that had learned how to smile. It's okay, he whispered, voice not his own. You can stay. I backed away, dragging Vanessa with me. The creatures were at the tunnel entrance now, watching, waiting. Vanessa gasped. The skull. Destroy it. I didn't think. I just moved. I grabbed the skull, its icy surface burning against my fingers, and smashed it against the stone floor. A piercing scream, not from the creatures, but from inside my own head, erupted, like 1,000 voices crying out at once. The walls shook. The air rippled. Then, in the blink of an eye, the figures were gone. The tunnel was empty. Even Mike. Only silence remained. Vanessa and I scrambled out, back into the forest, running until the first light of dawn painted the sky. We didn't speak, didn't look back. But as we reached the edge of the woods, something caught my eye. A reflection in the glass of my phone screen. For just a second, too fast, too faint. I saw them, the pale eyes, watching, waiting. And then, they were gone. But I know the truth now. They never really leave. If there's one thing I regret, it's not listening to the old man at the general store in Blairsville. He was missing a few teeth, smelled like chewing tobacco, and had a stare that could freeze your blood. I was just paying for a bottle of water and a protein bar when he looked at me and said, "You hiking up Blood Mountain alone, girl?" I told him I was, and he just shook his head. People go missing up there, don't go off the trail, and if you hear someone call your name, don't answer. I laughed it off. Locals love their ghost stories, don't they? I'd been hiking alone for years, never had a problem. Besides, the Appalachian Trail was full of other hikers. It wasn't like I was heading into the Amazon rainforest. So I ignored him, paid for my stuff, drove to the trailhead. The air was crisp, leaves just starting to turn that golden red, and the silence, peaceful, almost too peaceful. By the time I reached the ridge, the sun was low, bleeding across the sky. I set up camp near a clearing with a perfect view, took some photos, ate a granola bar. Nothing out of the ordinary, at least not until I saw the markings on the trees. Deep, jagged scratches, long gouges, like someone had been keeping count. The first gust of wind that hit my tent made me laugh. The second made me shiver. And the third? That was when I heard it. A knock. Not a normal forest sound, not an animal. A rhythmic, deliberate knocking. And then, my name. Lillian. I shot up so fast I nearly got tangled in my sleeping bag. My heart was slamming against my ribs. The voice had come from outside my tent. I grabbed my flashlight, took a breath, and unzipped the flap just enough to peek out. The forest was pitch black, my light cutting through the trees in weak, flickering beams. Nothing. But then I saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the clearing, too far away to make out details. Just a shape. Tall. Motionless. Watching, I pointed my flashlight directly at it. Gone. Not like it walked away, not like it ducked behind a tree, just vanished. I told myself it was just my nerves, maybe a shadow, maybe another hiker passing through. Yeah, that made sense. Except hikers don't whisper your name in the dark. Morning couldn't come fast enough. When it finally did, I packed up fast, eager to put some distance between me and that place. But as I reached for my backpack, the fabric was slashed open. My food was still there. My camera, my clothes. But my knife? Gone. I told myself I must have left it somewhere even though I knew I hadn't. Then I saw the footprints circling my tent. Bare, human. But they didn't lead away, only toward. I ran, didn't even bother packing the rest of my stuff. Just grabbed my camera and bolted, heart hammering, feet pounding against the dirt. I didn't care where I was going, just away from whatever had been standing outside my tent. But the trail, it wasn't right. I should have been heading down back toward the parking lot. Instead, every turn seemed to pull me deeper into the woods. The landscape twisted, unfamiliar, like the forest was shifting around me. That's when I saw it. An old hunting cabin half swallowed by the trees, the door barely hanging on its rusted hinges. I hesitated. Going inside felt like a terrible idea. But standing out here in the open, knowing something was watching me? Worse. Inside it smelled like mold and rot. The walls were scratched up, covered in carvings. Words, desperate messages. Don't turn around. He sees you when you sleep. Leave an offering, or you stay forever. And in the corner, bones. A pile of rotting teeth and broken fingers all arranged in some kind of sick altar. A cold wave of nausea hit me. But before I could move, a voice whispered behind me. Lillian. I spun around, camera shaking in my grip. Nothing. I snapped a photo. The flash lit up the room for half a second, and that's when I saw it. Myself, standing in the corner, smiling. I don't remember blacking out. When I came to, I was lying at the base of a tree, my arm gashed open like something had dragged me. But the worst part? My camera was gone. I stumbled forward, dazed, exhausted. Somehow I found my way back to the trail. Hikers were passing by, actual people. I wanted to cry. I called out, waving my arms. They walked right past me. No reaction, no glance in my direction. My voice cracked as I shouted again. One hiker turned slightly, then kept walking like he hadn't seen anything. Panic crawled up my throat. I ran, following them, but every step felt off. Like I wasn't really there. The trees thinned. The trail opened up into a small clearing with a stone marker. A memorial. My breath caught as I read the inscription. In memory of Lillian Graves, missing, presumed dead, 1987. No, that wasn't possible. My hands trembled as I reached out. That's when I saw it. My camera, sitting at the base of the marker. I picked it up, pulse pounding, and flipped through the photos. The last one sent ice through my veins. It was a picture of me, standing in the dark, smiling. And behind me, barely visible in the shadows, another face, watching. Hikers still go missing on Blood Mountain. Some are found. Most aren't. But every now and then, someone will leave a camera behind. And the last photo? Always the same. A woman in the dark, smiling, waiting. You ever had that feeling like you're being watched, but when you turn around, there's nothing there? Yeah, that feeling. I was hiking the Appalachian Trail alone, something I'd done plenty of times before. This time, I picked a route near Clingman's Dome, Tennessee, a place famous for its breathtaking views and apparently something else. It was late afternoon when I found an old, abandoned shelter just off the main trail. It wasn't on any recent maps, but it looked solid enough, so I decided to set up camp nearby. The moment I dropped my pack, though, something felt off. The air was too still, like the forest was holding its breath. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the silence became deafening. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just nothing. Then I heard it. A whisper. So faint I thought I imagined it. Shh. He's listening. I froze. My brain scrambled for a logical explanation. Wind, an animal, maybe even another hiker nearby. But when I turned my head, the trees stood still, their dark forms stretching toward the sky like frozen shadows. I shook it off. Probably just exhaustion playing tricks on me. Probably. At around 2 a.m. I woke up needing to pee. Typical. The closest spot was a narrow path leading to a small creek behind the shelter. I didn't even bother with a flashlight, just the dim glow of the moon filtering through the trees. Halfway there, something changed. The air felt heavier, like stepping into a room filled with static. That's when I heard it. A laugh. Not a normal laugh. Too breathy. Too distant. I stopped. My ears strained in the darkness. Then, clear as day, a woman's voice whispered from deep within the woods. Hello? I jumped, my pulse spiking hard. I scanned the trees, my breath caught in my throat. I didn't see anyone. Was she lost, injured? I hesitated, then forced out a casual, "Hey?" Silence. Not even the wind. The smart thing would have been to turn back, but instead, I stood there, waiting, listening. Nothing. I shook my head, cursing myself for getting spooked over some random sound. Probably just another camper messing around. I did my business, forced myself to laugh it off, and headed back. But my skin wouldn't stop crawling. Something about that voice wasn't right. It wasn't scared. It wasn't asking for help. It was calling me. Morning light felt like salvation. I barely slept after what happened, but in the daylight it all seemed stupid. Just my imagination. Or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. Still, something gnawed at me. Before packing up, I decided to check the area near the creek again, just to prove to myself there was nothing there. Big mistake. The forest smelled different, like damp wood mixed with something rotten. And then I saw it. A tree. Its bark carved with deep scratches. At first I thought it was just some old graffiti, but as I got closer, I felt my stomach drop. Don't listen. 3 words, slashed into the wood like someone had desperately tried to leave a warning. The cuts were fresh. That was enough. I turned back, my heart pounding. That's when I noticed something else. Footprints. Human. Barefoot. Leading from the woods to my campsite and stopping right outside my tent. I didn't stay to look around. I ran. By the time I reached my tent, I was breathless, shaking. I had to leave. Now. I stuffed my gear into my pack, not even bothering to fold my tent properly. Just as I zipped my bag, something shifted in the trees behind me. I turned too fast, nearly tripping over myself, but there was nothing there. At least, nothing I could see. I should have taken the main trail back, but I was panicked, desperate. I went for the shortcut, the one that cut through the old shelter. As I got closer, I saw the structure in daylight for the first time. And that's when I realized just how wrong this place was. The wooden walls weren't just rotting. They were covered in faces. Not drawings, carvings, dozens of them. Each one twisted in a silent scream, mouths open, eyes hollow. I wanted to run, but then I heard it. "Fine, May." The whisper slithered through the air, curling around my spine like cold fingers. It wasn't behind me. It was inside the shelter. I took one step closer, just one, and the temperature dropped. My breath came out in white puffs. The door creaked open, slow and deliberate. And then I saw it. A shadow standing inside, still, watching, waiting. Then, in the exact same voice from last night, it whispered, "Come back." That was it. I ran like hell. I didn't stop. Not for water, not for rest. I ran until my lungs burned, until I hit the main trail, until I was surrounded by other hikers. Real people, breathing, talking, alive. I never looked back. To this day, I don't know what I heard. I don't know what I almost answered. And I don't ever want to find out. That's my story. Take it however you want. But if you ever find yourself hiking the Appalachian Trail and you hear something whispering your name from the trees, don't listen. I should have listened to the old man. That's the thought that keeps looping in my head as I run through the fog-choked forest, branches slicing at my arms, something massive crashing through the underbrush behind me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This whole nightmare started when my best friend Logan and I decided to take a detour off the main Appalachian Trail near Blood Mountain, Georgia. We weren't hardcore hikers or anything, just two guys looking for an adventure, camping out under the stars, telling dumb stories over a fire. We stopped in a small town to grab supplies, and that's where we met the old man. Wrinkled, with eyes like cracked glass, he sat outside a gas station, watching us with this expression like he already knew something we didn't. "You boys stick to the main trail," he muttered as we packed our bags. We laughed it off. "Yeah, sure," Logan said, shouldering his pack. But then the old man grabbed my wrist, his grip surprisingly strong. "I mean it. Folks go missing up there. You don't want to end up like the others." I pulled away, uncomfortable but still not taking him seriously. Missing hikers were nothing new. Bad weather, bad luck, maybe a bear. We weren't planning on being reckless. Except we were. By late afternoon, we found a side trail, barely marked, winding into the trees like an invitation. Logan grinned. "Shortcut?" It wasn't on the map, but it looked well-traveled enough. So we took it. The deeper we went, the quieter the forest became. No birds, no wind, just the crunch of our boots and our own breathing. A heavy fog rolled in out of nowhere, swallowing the trees. Then we saw the cabin. It looked abandoned, the wood dark with age, a sagging roof barely holding together. But there was smoke rising from the crooked chimney. Someone was inside. We hesitated, but the fog was getting worse, and it wasn't like we had many options. I knocked. The door creaked open, and a man stood there, barely visible in the dim light. Mid-40s, grizzled, eyes sharp like a wolf's. "You lost?" Logan, ever the smooth talker, chuckled. "Not lost, just detoured." The man studied us for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Come in, but don't open the door again till sunrise." We should have turned around right then. Instead, we walked inside. The inside of the cabin was just as unsettling as the outside. Dim candlelight flickered against the wooden walls, casting long shadows over the dusty furniture. The place smelled like old wood and something else I couldn't quite place. Something damp, something wrong. The man who introduced himself as Silas didn't say much at first. He just pointed at a couple of chairs by the fireplace and told us to sit. Logan and I exchanged glances, but we were too tired to argue. "Storm's rolling in," Silas muttered, pouring himself a drink. "Bad night to be out." I nodded, rubbing my arms. "Yeah, we figured we'd stop for a bit until the fog clears." Silas let out this low chuckle but didn't say anything else. Instead, he sat down across from us, watching the fire like it held secrets only he could see. Then, as if remembering something, he turned to us, his expression serious. "Whatever happens tonight," he said, "don't open that door. Don't look outside. Don't make a sound." Logan shifted in his chair. "Why?" Silas's eyes darkened. "Because they'll hear you." I felt a chill creep up my spine. "Who?" Silas just shook his head. "You'll know soon enough." The wind picked up outside, howling through the trees. I tried to brush off the unease, convincing myself that Silas was just trying to scare us. But as the night deepened, things started happening. It began with the tapping, soft, rhythmic, like fingers drumming against the walls. At first I thought it was the wind, but then the tapping moved. It circled the cabin, slow and deliberate. Logan sat up, eyes wide. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. Silas didn't answer. He just pressed a finger to his lips and motioned for us to stay quiet. Then came the whispers. At first they were faint, barely audible beneath the wind, but as the minutes dragged on, they grew louder. Dozens of voices speaking at once, overlapping, murmuring things I couldn't understand. I could feel my pulse in my throat. Logan clutched the arms of his chair, his knuckles white. And then something scratched the window, not like an animal, not like tree branches, like nails, long, deliberate strokes against the glass. I swallowed hard, resisting the urge to look, but Logan, damn it, Logan, moved. He leaned forward just a little, trying to get a glimpse outside. That's when the thing knocked, a single heavy thud against the door. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Silas was up in an instant, his expression a mask of fury and fear. He grabbed Logan's arm and yanked him back into his seat. "They know you're here now," he hissed. "Stay still." The knocking came again, harder this time. And then, the door handle twisted. I couldn't breathe. "Who are they?" I whispered, barely able to get the words out. Silas hesitated, his gaze flicking to the door as it rattled in its frame. Then in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "They're the ones who never left." The candlelight flickered. Shadows stretched and twisted. Outside, something laughed, and we weren't alone anymore. The laughter outside sent ice through my veins. It wasn't natural. It wasn't human. It was wrong. A jagged, broken sound, like something pretending to laugh but not quite knowing how. Logan gripped my wrist so hard it hurt. "We need to get out of here," he whispered. Silas shook his head. "You step outside, you won't come back." Then, before we could react, the front door bucked inward, like something massive had thrown itself against it. The wooden beams groaned. Dust rained from the ceiling. I saw real fear in Silas's face now. He reached for something under the table. A shotgun, old but loaded. "They don't like being ignored," he muttered. Another impact. This time the door split down the middle. And then, in the thin sliver of moonlight that poured through, I saw it. A face. Or what was left of one. It was barely human. Stretched skin, hollow black eyes. A mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. Its fingers, long and wrong, curled around the cracked wood of the doorframe. Silas fired. The blast sent a shockwave through the cabin, deafening in the small space. The thing screeched, a high, piercing sound that rattled my skull, and then silence. I was breathing hard, my ears ringing, my pulse a war drum in my chest. Then Logan did something I'll never forgive him for. He bolted. Before Silas or I could stop him, He threw himself at the back door and ripped it open. Fog poured in, thick as smoke. For a split second, I saw shapes moving, dozens of them. Then Logan was gone, swallowed by the mist. No, no! I lunged forward, but Silas grabbed me, yanking me back just as something lunged from the fog. It was faster than a man, stronger than a man. The door slammed shut, nearly taking my fingers with it. Silas locked it. It's too late. His voice was hollow. I pounded on the wood. We have to get him back. Silas just stared at me, eyes filled with something worse than fear, knowing. He's one of them now. And then, from the fog outside, came a whisper. My own voice. Help me. I stepped back, my stomach twisting. That wasn't Logan's voice. It was mine. Something else was out there. Something that could mimic. The laughter came again, closer this time. Silas grabbed my arm. Sun's coming. If we run now, we might make it. We didn't wait. We threw open the door, the first gray light of dawn breaking over the horizon. The things didn't follow. Not yet. We ran. We ran until my lungs burned, until my legs gave out, until I could finally see the main road in the distance. By the time I looked back, the fog had swallowed the cabin. Silas disappeared that same night. And Logan, they never found his body. But sometimes, when the wind is just right, I hear him calling my name. And I know it's not him. I always thought horror stories were just that, stories. The kind you tell around a campfire to make your friends uneasy before bed. I never thought I'd end up living one. My name's Jonah Pierce. I used to run a small YouTube channel dedicated to urban legends and unsolved mysteries. It wasn't huge, but it had a decent following, enough to keep me chasing new stories. That's what led me to Blood Mountain, a stretch of the Appalachian Trail in Georgia, with a history darker than most people realize. I'd heard rumors, strange disappearances, sightings of a creature that didn't belong in any known species, and of course, whispers of a curse. It sounded like exactly the kind of thing that would get views. I convinced my friend and cameraman, Miles Becker, to come with me. He wasn't as into the supernatural as I was, but he liked the adventure. As long as we don't end up on one of those missing hiker documentaries I'm in, he joked as we packed the car. We arrived in Suches, Georgia late in the afternoon. It was a tiny town, the kind where everyone knows everyone. Before heading into the woods, we stopped at a gas station to grab supplies. That's where we met Earl Grayson. Earl was old, weathered, the kind of man who'd probably spent his entire life in these mountains. He was sitting outside the store, nursing a bottle of cheap beer. When he saw our gear, he let out a low chuckle. "You boys ain't going up there, are ya?" I exchanged a glance with Miles. Yeah, just doing a little filming for a documentary." Earl took a long sip before shaking his head. "Bad idea." "We'll be fine," Miles said, brushing him off. Earl's eyes darkened. "Listen to me, son. You can walk into those woods, sure. But if that sun sets while you're up there, you ain't walking back out." I felt a chill creep up my spine, but I forced a smile. "We'll be careful." Earl just shook his head again, muttering something under his breath as we walked away. An hour later, we were deep into the trail. The forest was alive, birds calling, leaves rustling, the distant trickle of water. It was beautiful, peaceful even. For a while. Then, as the sun dipped lower, everything went silent. Not gradually either. It was like someone had flipped a switch. One moment, we were surrounded by the sounds of nature. The next, it was just gone. No birds, no wind, no movement. Miles turned to me, his face tense. "Tell me you heard that." I nodded. I didn't just hear it. I felt it. Something was watching us. We pressed on, but something about the woods had changed. Every step felt heavier, like we were being pushed deeper into something we weren't supposed to see. Then we found the tracks. They were massive, bigger than any bear print I'd ever seen. But that wasn't what made them disturbing. The shape was wrong, almost like a human hand but elongated, the fingers curling into the dirt. Miles crouched down, running his fingers along the edges of one print. This isn't normal. I swallowed hard. Could be a deformed bear. Miles didn't answer. He just stood up and pointed at the trees. Deep gouges had been carved into the bark, long and jagged. Too high for a bear, too deep for anything that belonged in these woods. Something big had been here, and it had claws. Then we found the bones. At first I thought it was just an animal carcass, but the way the bones were arranged, almost deliberately, made my stomach turn, like something had placed them there on purpose. Miles lifted his camera. We should get this on film. As soon as he hit record, we heard it. A low, guttural growl, not far, maybe 50 yards away, hidden somewhere in the trees. Neither of us moved. Then, the growl turned into a deep, distorted laugh. Not an animal's laugh. A human one, but wrong, broken, garbled, like someone trying to imitate a sound they didn't quite understand. That was the moment I realized Earl was right. We shouldn't have come here, and the sun was already starting to set. We ran. I don't remember deciding to. I just know my body moved before my brain could process what was happening. The laughter, that awful, twisted laughter, echoed through the trees, growing louder as if it was circling us. Miles was just ahead, his breathing ragged. "We need to get back to the trail," he gasped. The problem was that we had no idea where it was. The sun was slipping below the horizon, shadows stretching unnaturally through the trees. Every direction looked the same. The towering pines twisted into silhouettes, and the air had taken on an eerie stillness. Then I saw it. Eyes, pale, milky white, peering at us from between the trees. Too high up to be human, too low to be an animal. They blinked once, slowly, as if assessing us, then they disappeared. A second later, a branch snapped behind us. Miles turned his camera toward the sound, just in time to catch a glimpse of something lunging toward him. A flash of matted fur, pale scarred flesh, twisted limbs, and then Miles was gone, dragged screaming into the dark. I froze, my stomach twisting into knots. "Miles!" I bolted after him, crashing through the underbrush. The camera lay on the ground, its red recording light still blinking. Beyond it, deep scratches in the dirt marked the path where he'd been taken. I didn't think. I just followed the trail. My mind screamed to turn back, but my body wouldn't let me. Then I saw it, the old burned-out foundation of a house, barely visible through the overgrown weeds, and standing in the center of it was Miles. His head was tilted at an unnatural angle, his limbs twitching. His breath came out in short, ragged gasps. Something huge stood behind him. It was human, but not. Its spine curved unnaturally, its body stretched and scarred. Clumps of fur covered its arms, but its face was bare, revealing a grotesque muzzle of twisted flesh and exposed teeth. It whispered something into Miles's ear, and then it pushed him toward me. Miles stumbled forward, his eyes wide with terror. "Jonah!" "Run." Then his body convulsed, his back arching, his fingers clawing at his own skin. His mouth stretched open, but no scream came out, and before my brain could even process what was happening, he collapsed, dead. A low growl rose from behind him. I turned and ran. The forest blurred around me. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I couldn't stop. Not with that thing chasing me. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to keep moving. Then, suddenly, a gunshot. A sharp crack split the air, followed by a guttural screech. I turned and saw a figure emerging from the shadows. Earl Grayson, holding an old rifle. "Get down!" he barked. I dropped as another shot rang out. The creature howled, stumbling backward. Earl grabbed my arm, yanking me to my feet. "We ain't got long, move!" We ran together, my legs barely keeping up. Behind us, the forest erupted in horrible, unearthly screams. I didn't dare look back. Somehow we made it. Bursting out of the tree line, we reached Earl's truck. He shoved me inside and floored it, the tires kicking up dust as we sped away. Neither of us spoke, not until we were miles away, the trees finally thinning, the weight of whatever lived in those woods left behind. Then Earl let out a breath. "Told you boys not to go up there." I couldn't even argue. It's been months. I haven't uploaded a single video since. I tried to tell myself it was just a wild animal, some kind of mutation. But deep down, I know better. I know because I still have Miles' camera. I can't bring myself to watch the footage. But sometimes when I leave it on my desk, I swear, I hear something, not through the speakers, not in the room, but outside, right beyond my window, waiting. I still don't know how we made it out of there. It was supposed to be a perfect weekend, just me and Olivia, hiking a quiet stretch of the Appalachian Trail near Clingman's Dome in the Great Smoky Mountains. We had planned this for weeks, craving the peace of the woods, away from the noise of the city. The hike had been beautiful, but as we reached our camping spot, a small clearing near a slow-moving river, we stumbled upon something unexpected. A tiny abandoned wooden shack, barely holding itself together, sat right off the trail. The wood was darkened with age, and the roof sagged under the weight of thick moss. At first, we thought it was just another old hunter's shelter. But then Olivia pointed to something carved into the door. "He sees at night." I laughed it off, but Olivia looked uneasy. "It's probably just some joke," I told her. But in the back of my mind, something about it felt wrong. We kept moving, setting up our tent a little further down the trail. The river was right behind us, and a thick wall of trees surrounded the site. It felt isolated, peaceful, until it didn't. As the sun started setting, Olivia went to gather firewood while I unpacked. That's when I noticed him. A man, thin, ragged, and moving strangely, was making his way down the trail toward us. His clothes were filthy, his hair was matted, and he kept glancing behind him like he was being followed. I didn't like it. Something about him felt off. When he got close, he smiled, too wide, too forced, and muttered, "Did you see him? He spoke to you yet?" "What?" I asked, exchanging a glance with Olivia, who had just returned with an armful of wood. The man stepped closer. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, darting around like he expected something to jump out at him. "You'd know if he did. He doesn't whisper. He just knows." A shiver ran down my spine. "Who are you talking about?" Olivia asked cautiously. The man suddenly stiffened, looking over our shoulders into the trees behind us. His face went pale. Then, without another word, he bolted back up the trail, disappearing into the thick woods. We spun around, expecting what? I don't even know. But there was nothing there. The silence that followed was too heavy, too unnatural. Even the wind had stopped. I tried to shake it off, forcing a laugh. Well, that was weird, but Olivia wasn't laughing. "I don't think we should stay here." I wanted to agree, but it was already getting dark, and deep down I knew something was watching us. That night, the woods felt different. The usual sounds of the forest, rustling leaves, distant owls, the steady flow of the river, were replaced by an unnatural stillness. Even the crickets had stopped. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself that the man we saw was just some paranoid hiker who'd been out here too long. But Olivia couldn't shake the feeling. She kept glancing toward the trees, her grip on my arm tightening every time a branch snapped in the distance. I don't like this," she whispered. I sighed. "Do you want to pack up and hike back in the dark?" She hesitated, then shook her head. So we stayed. Sometime around midnight, Olivia got up to use the bathroom. I stayed in the tent, half asleep, until I heard it. The sound of footsteps, soft, slow, moving just outside our campsite. I sat up, heart pounding. "Liv?" No answer. Then a whisper, so close I could feel it in my ear. "You shouldn't have stayed." I scrambled out of the tent, my flashlight shaking as I scanned the area. Olivia was still near the river, frozen in place. She turned slowly, her face pale. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded, throat dry. That's when we saw the footprints, all around our tent. Deep, deliberate prints in the dirt. They weren't there before. Someone had been circling us while we slept, and they weren't gone. We didn't say a word. We just grabbed our gear and ran. The trees blurred past as we sprinted toward the main road, our breaths ragged, our legs burning. Behind us, the forest felt alive, like it was shifting, closing in. Then came the footsteps, not ours. Something was running behind us, fast. Olivia stumbled, and I caught her just as a whisper cut through the trees, this time louder, clearer. "Where are you going?" We didn't stop. The road was just ahead, the faint glow of a streetlight breaking through the darkness. Almost there. And then, a shadow moved between the trees. Not human, not animal, something else. I yanked Olivia forward, and we burst onto the pavement, nearly collapsing in exhaustion. A pair of headlights appeared in the distance. A ranger's truck. He pulled over, taking one look at us and shaking his head. "You saw him, didn't you?" We didn't answer. We didn't have to, because as we drove away, I looked back at the trees, and in the darkness, standing just beyond the tree line, was a figure. Tall, watching, still, waiting.